the project, as today we really want to show the solutions of the three other speakers. So in Stunning, the goal really of this project is to find, analyze, synthesize, but also promote sustainable business models for the deep renovation of buildings. So we started to do that in 2017, and now we are still working until September of this year with CSTB, Solintel, RINA, Steinbees 2i, and of course my company, The Well Management. So our approach in Stunning, very briefly, first was to create a refurbishment package database with information of demonstration or real cases in European Union. Secondly, we identified the barriers in renovation sector to promote the most promising business models and innovative case studies. And finally, the main goal is really to share in our knowledge sharing platform all this information, and our KSP is called the Renovation Hub. So to go very briefly more in detail of this scheme, regarding our work on refurbishment packages, what we did was really a review of existing technical solutions for building refurbishment. So we made a focus on integrated approach, and what we meant by integrated approach was a combination of solutions that can optimize the energy efficiency of buildings. So for that we had commercial packages developed by industrials, for instance, or also innovative solutions developed directly by EU projects. So to compare all those refurbishment packages, we proceeded to cost-benefit analysis, and this work is still ongoing, but everything is online in the Renovation Hub. Here you've got some examples of EU projects that we promote on our Renovation Hub. So as you can see, we have 4 categories for all these combined solutions, and most of the projects succeeded to combine at least one solution from each category. Then regarding our work on business model, here what we did was really focus on innovative business models for building refurbishment in European Union. So the goal here is really, once again, to promote the most promising ones, and to do that we made, or we are still doing, some webinars like the one today, but also promote through some articles in the Renovation Hub. And finally, for example, finally in September, we will do a final joint event in Paris to explain the main results and trying to make work different projects to share their work. We are still trying to find real case studies that implementing the business model that we found. The work is still ongoing, and of course do not hesitate to contact me if you have ideas. So here you've got the big picture of the business model. So as you can see, we have like 20 business models promoted through articles in the Renovation Hub. And finally, to conclude my introduction, just a short word to show you to show you a short presentation of the Renovation Hub. So here you've got the address, internet address. Do not hesitate to go there and to register to our stakeholder community to receive all our information. Now I give the floor to Daniela to present her establishment of quality assurance schemes. So please, Daniela, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. Good afternoon from my side. I want to give you a brief introduction to the quality project and to our aims we are trying to tackle. So the quality project aims at establishing quality assurance for energy efficiency services. I will go into the details of energy efficiency services shortly, but before, I would like to highlight the status quo of energy efficiency services in Europe at the moment. So, energy efficiency services is one possible business model for the implementation of energy efficiency improvement measures in buildings, but also, for example, in street lighting or energy supply systems. The general aim of the project is to increase the market activity on the energy efficiency service market in Europe, to increase these investments in energy efficiency, which are currently much lower than the expectations on the market development, as Fernando already mentioned before in the introduction. So also the Energy Efficiency Directive of the European Commission addresses this topic of energy efficiency service markets, inter alia in Article 18, where it suggests to develop quality assurance schemes for energy efficiency services, which is especially important for small contractors to increase their market activities and to reduce difficulties on the market for the small providers by increasing trust of clients in their services. I will skip this slide. So energy efficiency services, as I mentioned, is one business model to implement energy efficiency improvement measures. They are performance-based contractual agreements between a building owner and a service provider, or they can also tackle the supply of efficient energy supply with renewable energies. I included you the definition according to the Energy Efficiency Directive on the bottom of this slide, but I won't go into more detail here. So the services we are targeting in the quality project is one, the energy performance contracting, focusing on energy efficiency improvement measures, and B, on energy supply contracting, which is focusing on the supply with renewable energies, as I mentioned before. Other sub-forms of energy efficiency services are operational contracting and integrated energy contracting, but I won't go into much detail here. As I briefly mentioned before, the quality project has three basic aims, which is reducing the complexity of the service, standardized quality-related aspects, and the third is to increase trust in the service providers. All these three together will result in an increased investment in energy efficiency services in the building sector in the EU. And we are trying to achieve these aims by introducing national quality assurance schemes. The reason why we are doing this is that the services are very complex because the relationships between the market actors, which are service providers, clients, and financial institutions, are very difficult, as those market actors have different expectations in the service and different approaches how they are going to implement such a project. That's why we started the project with doing a market research, an online questionnaire in 2017 in 15 countries to get a more detailed information on the market situation and also on the barriers currently existing in those markets for energy efficiency services. The questionnaire tackled 109 energy efficiency service providers and 79 facilitators. And in addition to that, we also performed some interviews with financial institutions to also receive their perspective on the market. The major results of this survey were that in the case of energy performance contracting, the major barriers are complexity of the service concept and lack of information on the side of the clients and financial institutions, as well as lack of trust in the ESCO industry. This means in the service providers, as well as administrative barriers and low energy prices which are currently on the market, which are hindering the implementation of energy efficiency services as the motivation of clients is rather low. In case of energy supply contracting, the major barriers are again lack of trust in the ESCO industry, but also in this time lack of support from the government and low customer demand. So our approach to overcome these barriers and to increase the investment in energy efficiency is to establish national quality assurance schemes, which are based on defined quality criteria for technical and for financial aspects. And those criteria are discussed and agreed upon in active national promoting teams. So in each of the participating countries, an active national promoting team is discussing the structure and the business model of the quality assurance scheme. The basic set of quality criteria is the same in all the countries. And we are currently establishing those quality assurance schemes in the partnering countries. The quality criteria which have been developed consist of technical and financial criteria, which are presented in a guideline. So it's a single common set of quality criteria, and they are tailor-made to the application on energy efficiency services. These criteria can be applied by different stakeholders. So they can be used by clients for tendering the service. They can also be used for service providers to adapt their products and services, and they can also be used by financial institutions. And I will give you now a brief overview on the criteria. In each case, they consist of an overall quality criteria, which is split up in several assessment criteria, and they are covering the whole value chain of the energy efficiency service, from the adequate analysis to the savings guarantee to measurement and verification, and also to specific contract stipulations. And the guideline which presents the quality criteria contains a description of how these quality criteria and the individual assessment criteria can be proven. As in some of the participating countries, financing energy efficiency services is difficult. We at the same time developed financial quality criteria. So these criteria are mainly used for providing information to the financial institution by the service provider to make it easier to get financed for the service. We will skip this slide, and I will go into the financial quality criteria just to give you an overview. The financial quality criteria consists of 5 criteria, which focus on the most relevant aspects related to financing energy efficiency and also risks. So from cash flow prediction to the value of the assets, but also cover non-energy benefits of energy efficiency service projects. And I will already come to the conclusion now. So, as I mentioned, these criteria build the basis for the national quality assurance schemes, which are currently under development. in the participating countries. We have seen in our survey and also in contact with service providers that these reliable and verifiable criteria are required, and standardization of projects and contracts reduce transaction costs, and they are necessary to increase the trust of clients and financial institutions in the service providers. The criteria allow smaller projects to be implemented, which is important to activate the full potential of the energy efficiency service market. And it is important, financing is important because it is the key to achieve the energy and climate goals. So financing energy efficiency projects, as I mentioned, is difficult in some of the countries, and we believe that the quality criteria we have developed will contribute to make financing energy efficiency projects easier. As Fernando already mentioned, the consortium consists of 12 partners within 11 countries in the European Union, and together we are covering 18 European countries. I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Daniela, for this the presentation of this interesting and very clever quality assurance scheme. I'm pretty sure that participants will have questions for you during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Do not hesitate to write your questions on the box dedicated on your screen. So now I give the floor to Hugo Grasset to present his results on the identification of barriers that slow down replication and potential solutions. Hugo, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting the results of the study on the identification of the most important barriers and potential solutions in the EU renovation market. So quick content of the presentations. We're just going to go over the identified barriers in the beginning, then the actual contextualization and analysis process that we performed during the project, and the results and solutions. So in terms of the identified barriers, we first actually ranked them in two main categories. There are the barriers that refer to that limit uptake of refurbishment solutions at the decision-making level, so basically affecting stakeholders like homeowners, buyers, or end users. And then we have, so those are the ones that appear on the screen right now. And we also have barriers that prevent stakeholders more from the AEC industry from taking part efficiently in the renovation process, which we'll see as following. And then within both categories, we rank these by barrier typology. So for instance here, financial typology, and then the barrier themselves. So on the current screen, these are the barriers at the decision-making level, which were contextualized according to the methodology I'll present after. And then these are the barriers that affect the stakeholders taking part in the renovation process. From a general point of view, we basically, to understand the dynamics behind these barriers, we proceeded to collecting case studies around the EU, surveying also architecture, engineering, and construction professionals and other relevant stakeholders on how significant certain barriers are, and also obtaining direct feedback. So basically segmenting all the responses, the stakeholder types, what buildings they intervene on. We were able to get a glimpse at certain dynamics and regional specificities and building typology effects that characterize the barriers in question. So on the current slide, you can actually see the breakdown of one of the surveys we ran with a significant score of the barrier typologies. So this is just a summary of the typologies. The survey in itself is more detailed, and we're going to see it after. But a significance is from 0 to 5, with 5 being the most significant. And in terms of the actual case studies that we collected, this is a breakdown of the amount of barrier typologies that appeared in all the, or the amount of times barrier typologies appeared in the case studies that we used to sort of assess the dynamics of the barriers throughout the EU. So in terms of, we decided in this presentation and generally to focus on financial typologies, organizational and structural shortcomings of the markets, regulatory typologies, and split incentives. So in terms of financial barrier typologies, here you can see on the right, the top right corner, you can see basically the score per country of the barrier typology and also the amount of times it appeared in the case studies used. And then on the bottom right, you have a sort of significant score of the actual barriers within the typology that we obtained throughout the work we performed. Now, basically, we focused on the areas with the most feedback, or the barriers where we obtained the most feedback, which is insufficient budgets on part of homeowners, limited ability for ESCOs to offer financing on EPCs, limited involvement of banks and third-party financiers for EPCs, and the limited impact of energy performance certificates on property value generally. So it's basically, we realized during our work that a shared savings approach in EPCs is a good model in developing markets because customers assume no financial risk. So it's making it an efficient vehicle promoting higher renovation rates. Nevertheless, generally the typical ESCO market is majority composed of SMEs that have difficulties in obtaining financing from third parties and banks due to most likely risk perceptions that are high and also just lack of credit history and experience. And even in the case when small ESCOs are able to obtain loans, there's an important barrier as they become too heavily leveraged and unable to contract for their debt for subsequent projects, hindering the market and renovation rates as a whole. So basically, one of the three first solutions we offer towards are related directly towards this limited ability for ESCOs to obtain third-party financing. And it goes through basically the creation of associations and clusters that would be capable of bringing support towards ESCOs or to ESCOs in EPC contract modeling, with their members benefiting from training programs and exchange workshops and seminars. And it would also be beneficial with regard to this if certificates and official qualification seals were distributed through such associations, and that these associations establish closer ties with the financial and banking sector. So basically the ultimate objective is to foster a favorable banking environment for shared savings EPC financing involving certification or associative backbones capable of vouching for the quality of SMEs and smaller sized ESCOs in order to minimize credit risk perceptions that are currently plaguing the market. We also here included Euro contract EPC models as a solution. Basically what we were able to observe is that in the countries where there are more standardized EPC practices, most notably Germany, the general significant scores of relevant barriers on sort of ESCOs capable of offering financing have been rated as lower. And then in terms of public regional rent control indices, so this actually relates more towards the barrier relevant towards the limited impact of energy performance certificates on value. And it's basically the creation of indexes where listing average rental prices per zone, area, city, which also factor in building criteria such as energy efficiency. Basically, the creation of such indices would enable landlords and building owners to reflect the cost of renovations within their rent within a reasonable sort of range, of course, to protect occupants as well. In terms of organizational and structural shortcomings of the energy efficiency renovation markets, we focused mainly on basically the barriers where the highest levels of feedback and scores were obtained. So these refer to barriers in public procurement schemes. So basically the insufficient resources on part of SMEs to tender for public contracts and public APCs. And also one of them, which is most well known towards everybody generally, working in the AEC sector, the construction sector, is the difficulty in coordinating work with other stakeholders involved in renovation projects. So in terms of the public procurement schemes, what we've noted interacting with basically obtaining feedback through case studies, surveys, and stakeholders is that generally SMEs have a difficult time in basically have limited resources for tendering processes and public EPC tendering processes. What we have noted is that generally the significance of that barrier is limited in countries or regions where there's an actual subdivision of contracts into lots a subdivision of contracts into lots. So basically one of these examples is Germany, where their procurement rules establish that the lowest tender price alone is not the sole decisive criterion. So they have a special account that should be given to consider the interests of small and medium enterprises, and contracts are subdivided into partial lots. Whereas in France, for instance, where the barrier was rated higher, it's an example of a country where basically public EPC tenders are not automatically divided into lots, favoring SME integration. And that's since the Grenelle II law of 2010, which has given the possibility for central and local administrations to now have access to EPC-type global contractual agreements, which are agreements that bypass the obligation of allotment and have generally ended up in sort of larger ESC-type providers to offer, well, to basically win these tenders and contracts. And also, finally, in terms of the actual fragmentation of the market, it's basically known that the industry in general throughout Europe is characterized by high levels of fragmentation, subcontracting practices with little exchange in information between the different actors. And we basically came to the conclusion that one-stop shops in general are the most sort of adapted approach at minimizing these types of barriers, as they imply already formed teams of stakeholders and SMEs with pre-contractual agreements and experience. So it basically limits those types of barriers. In terms of regulatory barrier typologies, one of the most interesting dynamics that we observed in terms of these barriers was actually through direct feedback and interaction with our personal network and a lot of stakeholders within the EU renovation industry. And it's that of it's not one that was directly tested in our survey, but it basically refers to the lack of continuity in relevant regulations throughout Europe. What we noted is that a lot of stakeholders, SMEs and ESCOs, were basically obliged to on a rather regular basis adapt and change their business models and business approaches on a very regular basis due to changing regulations. One of the most recent examples would have been, for instance, the sun tax in Spain with self-generation photovoltaic projects, which put in jeopardy a big part of that relevant market. So basically some of the solutions that we proned here was continuous communication initiatives, obviously with public authorities, and also, once again, the creation of clusters at a national level, but also enhancing and focusing on the cooperation and integration of public entities within these national clusters. And finally, one of our last barriers is relates to split incentives. It's basically who does it relates to who the benefits of an energy efficient renovation come down to. So whether it's the owner, the occupants. So right now, basically, if a building owner decides to do an energy efficient renovation, he may not see the full benefits of that renovation. So some of the solutions that we sort of emphasized on was the creation of rent indices, as has already been detailed in basically the section on linking property increases in energy performance certificates and property value. And also perhaps creating schemes where energy cost savings through energy efficient renovations would be partially shared between the actual owner and occupants. And that has actually been explored in a couple of H2020 projects as of now already. All the information here is actually more detailed and more segmented, especially the survey scores in the available deliverables on the Stunning internet page. So there's more information available there if anybody is interested in obtaining more feedback. And I'm also, of course, open to anybody's question. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Hugo, for this interesting presentation and for the presentation of your work on these barriers. Yes, you're right. You will have the deliverables on the Stunning website. Do not hesitate, and thanks for all these details. Now, oops, sorry, something happened. Okay, thanks. So now this is Aristotelis, who will present the results of his project EPC Plus. So now, Aristotelis, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. As Fernando told you, I was the project coordinator of the EPC Plus project, and on the first slide you can see the website in which you can find a lot more information than what I will be telling you today. So the EPC Plus project was a Horizon 2020 project which started in March 2015 and ended roughly 3 years later in April 2018. When it started, the EU, the Commission, considered it as one of the most ambitious projects of that particular call, and the reason why it was considered ambitious was because it targeted SMEs. So it targeted both SMEs on the demand side, so the clients who wish to have access to energy efficiency services, but it also targeted SMEs on the supply side. Therefore, we're talking about SME ESCOs who offer energy efficiency services. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the project consortium, which consisted of 13 partners from 11 countries, covering a large geographical area of the European Union. So we had some northern, some eastern, some southern, central, and also western European countries. So, when we started the project in March 2015, we had an EPC market, which really hasn't changed much, unfortunately, since then. And what was this EPC market? In the public sector, we had seen quite a few energy performance contracts in municipal street lighting. And we had also seen quite a few projects in the building sector, although it must be said that most of the projects that were implemented and that we had seen relied either on national subsidies or European funds. So we had seen very few projects which were funded either by ESCOs or by the public authorities. Now, in the private sector, what was the case then and is still now is that here the situation was much worse, particularly considering energy performance contracting. In the tertiary sector, in very large buildings of the tertiary sector, we had seen quite some projects, mostly implemented by multinational companies and large ESCOs. And as was very characteristically said by a colleague of mine, and I've stolen this phrase from him, EPC in the private sector has seen very little progress in the last 20 years, and this is since 1990. The 20 years that he's referring to now, I think we're close to 30 years, and we have much more presentations than actual projects. On the other hand, energy supply contracting is something which has been much more successful. So, what are the main reasons which impede a real breakthrough of energy performance contracting in the private sector, and more specifically in SMEs? Because just to remind you, the EPC project, EPC Plus project, targeted SMEs. So, on behalf of the clients, therefore those who are receiving or energy efficiency services, what was usually the case is that they usually do not have the possibility to finance themselves these projects, or simply they are not willing to supply the necessary collateral which is requested by the financial institutions in order to obtain credit financing. On the other hand, if we look at the large energy service providers, the multinational companies which I mentioned earlier, who have access to equity or credit financing, what we see is that energy companies, and we're talking here about utilities and public power corporations, who usually have access to equity or credit financing, and who also have the added advantage of having an energy supply contract with the client. So in a way, this is a sort of guarantee for them that they will be paid back their investment. Energy performance contracting really goes against their business logic. They want to sell energy, they don't want you to save energy, so they are not very enthusiastic about this whole idea and are not really pursuing it very actively. On the other hand, we also have the large multinational ESCOs, and for them, the investments, the project sizes, and the profit magnitudes of energy efficiency projects in SMEs are too small to be of interest to them. The main reason being that these companies have very large overhead costs. They have a lot of personnel because they want to they want to be able to offer a large range of technical solutions. So small projects are not interesting for them, and similarly, deep renovation of buildings is also not interesting to them, mainly because they have these projects offer very long payback periods. Now, concerning the financial institutions, who are the ones who could be able to provide credit financing for either the small ESCOs or the larger ESCOs, credit financing for small private sector projects is difficult, as the financial sector institutions deem that the high due diligence costs and the financial risks are prohibitive for them, so they are not interested in these type of projects. Leasing, which is a solution for these financial institutions and which they do offer, is something which really is very restrictive for energy efficiency. Basically, we're talking only of solutions such as cogeneration. So we're talking about solutions where the ESCO can install a machine which can then be removed if something goes wrong with the EPC contract. And lastly, for the financial institutions, the EPC contract is not usually acceptable as partial collateral for credit financing. In some countries, very few really, this is a possibility, but in the large majority of the countries, this is not a possibility. And finally, concerning the barriers, small ESCOs who are interested in these smaller projects, unlike the large ESCOs, simply do not have access to financing. Credit financing for them is not a possibility due to balance sheet overload, I think the leverage, which was previously mentioned by Hugo. And also the complex projects which have a wide variety of energy efficiency measures have very high transaction costs for the procurement of the energy services, and they also have a very high cost of measurement and verification. So, considering all what I just mentioned, the main objectives of the EPC Plus project were to simplify the existing EPC models, which were basically tailored to large-scale projects through the creation of simple, standardized technical solutions with very simple monitoring and verification procedures that could be easily financed by either the client or the small ESCOs. And the second objective was that these energy services be provided by SME partnerships. And I'll tell you a bit more about this in the next few slides. So the technical solutions which our consortium decided which they would standardize and promote, we split them into two categories. We have the energy efficiency measures, and as you can see, we have very simple measures. We have lighting, hydraulic adjustment of heating systems, modernization of pumps and electrical motors, HVAC control systems, programming of BMS, and renovation replacement of heating boilers. So these were the 7 technologies which we decided to promote. And we also considered renewable energy, even though it's not exactly EPC, it's ESC. But we decided that as ESC is implemented, it would be a good idea to also provide, let's say, standardized solutions for these technologies, as long as they were also coupled with an energy efficiency measures. So we didn't want our SME partnerships providing only solar water heaters. It would have to be, for example, a combination of, let's say, indoor lighting and solar water heaters. And SME partnerships, which I mentioned earlier, what are these? SME partnerships are organized clusters of SMEs of complementary expertise which jointly supply energy services and have a structured long-term collaboration with commonly agreed objectives. What we tried to do with this SME partnerships was to make SMEs work together, thereby making them, let's say, compare to a multinational ESCO, so they would have the range of technical expertise of a large multinational ESCO, without, however, the large overhead costs that a large multinational ESCO has. And the magic words really for these SME partnerships is firstly the complementary expertise. So an SME partnership, we don't want 2 or 3 ESCOs collaborating. What is needed is that we have, let's say, an HVAC expert, a lighting expert, an ESCO with contracting expertise. We want these companies to work together, as they are not competitors. We want people who work together and who don't look at each other as competitors. And the second magic word is long-term collaboration. And SME partnerships, in order for there to be trust between these partners, and in order for these partners to share information and work together, they really must have a long-term contracted collaboration. So we're talking about contracts in which they agree on exclusivity between them for at least 3 years. And really, the market niche which we were aiming at, if you look at the top right-hand side, we have standard EPC, which is for big buildings, which concerns projects, large project sizes with high levels of guarantee. And if you look at, let's say, pay-as-you-save solutions, which have low-level guarantee, what our project aimed at was the niche in the bottom right corner of this graph. So we want EPC services which for low to medium project sizes with medium to high levels of service and guarantee. At the time that our project was implemented, by many, let's say, fellow colleagues from other Horizon 2020 projects, this EPC Plus project was considered very controversial. We were accused by many of cherry picking. So what do they mean by cherry picking? Is that we are selecting the low-cost energy efficiency measures with with small payback periods, and this makes things a lot more difficult for companies offering deep renovation, because basically it removes from their measures those low cost and small payback period measures which reduce, let's say, the payback periods of their larger projects. Are we cherry picking? Yes, absolutely, we are, and what we argue is that what's happening now is that everyone is waiting and considering deep renovation, and the cherries that we are accused of cherry picking are just rotting away and falling. And I wish the case were different. I wish that renovation projects, which I'm I agree with completely, I wish that they would be implemented, but they're not. And unfortunately, the lower cost measures are also not being implemented, and this is unfortunate, because by implementing these low cost measures with with smaller payback periods, you can also, let's say, through the savings, obtain more financing, more credit for the larger cost renovation, which one would like to implement. So the results, and I'm almost finished, is that in the 3-year period, in these 11 countries, we managed to implement 25 projects. The total investment of the projects amounted to more than 3.3 million euro, which is not a great number, but if one considers that the total funding for the project was 1.5 million euro, we managed to create, let's say, double the amount of money that the EU funded us with. So we managed to not circulate, I don't know the word, but we managed to mobilize investments twice that was given to the EU for our project. It's interesting to note that of the 11 countries that participated, 2 countries did not manage to implement any projects, and I think it's interesting for all of you to know which 2 countries and why. The first country was Germany, interestingly enough and surprisingly enough, and the main reason, according to our German partner for this, was that in Germany most people and companies have very easy access to financing with very low interest rate loans, and the energy prices are also very low. So for SMEs in Germany, it's considered a very low-risk investment, and they are perfectly willing to do it themselves without involving an energy service company, and as the guarantee of performance is not so important for them. It's considered to them to be a very low risk. And this is very much a special case because in most of the countries financing was the major issue. The second country which didn't implement a project was Bulgaria, and the main reason here was parallel to this, during that time period of our project, Bulgaria had a very large subsidy project for buildings in the private sector. So most of the energy service companies had no time to look for potential clients, as they were all very busy working for these big subsidy projects. And so here it's interesting to see how sometimes subsidies can be counterproductive to the market of energy services. So finally, and this is my last slide, what were the important lessons learned during the project? The first one was that these SME partnerships that I described to you, they cannot work if there is no mutual trust between all the partners. Wherever we had partnerships between partners who did not were not familiar with the other and had not collaborated before, they failed. There really has to be trust between all the partners in these SME partnerships. What we also saw was that SME clients want to work with these SME partnerships. They prefer working and giving work to people with whom they have worked before and who belong to their local regional community, and so they have access to and are familiar with. Large multinational companies, sometimes they don't trust them because these are people they don't know, they come from other cities, and so these small SME clients want to work with these SME partnerships. Thirdly, quality certification, as Daniela described in her presentation, is very important to clients, to the SME clients, particularly as these energy efficiency services are something new to them, and really they don't know whether to trust them or not. A quality assurance scheme, a certified quality assurance scheme, either on a national or European basis, would be something which would definitely help them to overcome their distrust. Also, and this I think was one of the most important lessons, was that especially for SMEs, the non-energy benefits of energy efficiency measures proved to be more convincing to the clients. And very characteristic examples are the commercial shops, where the increase in the visual, in the lighting, increased sales, and that was therefore a much more crucial factor in the clients reaching the decision to implement the measures. Energy saving was not as important as increasing the value of their goods that they were selling, and likewise in office buildings, the thermal and visual comfort, and therefore the productivity of the employees of the building, was a much more crucial factor to the owners rather than the energy saved. And lastly, and I think this is something which Daniela, with whom I also collaborate in the quality project, agrees with, cession and forfeiting of contracts seems to be really the best, if not the only solution for financing at the moment of energy performance contracting for small ESCOs. If banks do not see this as an option, then really, I'm afraid that the situation will continue as it has for the last years, and we will not see a breakthrough of EPC. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Aristotelis. Thanks a lot. Very interesting presentation. Happy to see that you already succeeded to implement your EPC Plus model in 25 projects. It's quite impressive. And now I will proceed to the last part of this webinar, which are the conclusions and wrap up. So I will try to summarize what has been said in the last hour. So probably we should start with the main results and main findings on refurbishment packages. What we can say is that barriers to energy renovation are generally non-technical. They are due to financing issue, but also to a lack of information from the building owners, and it reduces drastically the acceptance of these actors to renovate their building. And also another barriers can be the lack of skills from contractors or SMEs to, for instance, innovate with new business model and change their habits. Our advices on that is really to develop a systemic, integrated, and user-centered approach from design to operation. It can also be very interesting to develop training activities to build up skills of contractors. A coordinated approach that involves all the actors are, let's say, not only necessary but mandatory. And finally, an increase in the research to find innovative business model and smart financing is really important. About that, for the conclusions on business model, what we can say is that, as I just said, we need innovative business model and smart financing, to accelerate the deep renovation of EU building stock. So the business model must move the risk and financial expenses from the owners to institutional investors or banks. This business model, they must also highlight the non-energy benefits to decrease the risk and payback time. For that, this business model, they have to be, once again, user-centered. They must focus on the multiple benefits of energy renovation. And what we meant by that is that really to promote the comfort and health after the renovation of buildings, and not only the money, the finance. And finally, develop collaboration models at all levels of the value chain. Just a last remark on the key findings for the business model, and it has been said by the speakers previously, but to promote the right business model, we really need to take into account the specificity of the geographical area. As Aristotelis just said with the German case, not all the models can be applied in every country. Once again, I proceed to the promotion part of our renovation hub. Do not hesitate to go there and to check the articles, to read our case studies, but also do not forget that you can contribute. So please become a stunning stakeholder. There is the registration form here. You can contribute to the renovation hub also by publishing articles. We would be very happy to promote your solutions. And finally, save the date. We will have another webinar in September with builders this time, and also our final event will be in September in Paris, as I said at the beginning of this webinar. So save the date. Please register to the stakeholder community